youth representative of Optimist International in Nairobi, and Liberato Bautista is the president of the Conference of NGOs. Thank you all for joining the meeting today and for sharing your knowledge with us. Optimist International is one of the largest network of professional women with a social political commitment and is represented in 120 countries. Optimist International is committed to improve the living conditions of women and girls worldwide and to contribute to a better global understanding. And now I have the pleasure to welcome the World President of Optimist International, Suyang Analigam, for her opening remarks. Suyang, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you.
It is a great honor for me to say a few words in this virtual side event, which seeks to inform us how civil society, including women and girls, can join public institutions and local communities in fighting against climate change and organized environmental crime. As of December 2023, environmental crime has become the third most lucrative industry for transnational organized crime groups, generating up to USD 280 billion a year, destabilizing communities, economies, and the environment. On December 12, 2023, UNODC Executive Director Gadawali recognized this, observing that organized crime poses a major threat to our environment, with organized criminal groups around the world engaging in wildlife trafficking, crimes in the fisheries sector, waste trafficking, and illegal mining, among other illicit activities. This exploitation has a serious impact on our ecosystems, on our national security, and on the lives of millions of people who depend on these natural resources for their livelihoods. Today, please join me in listening to experts in these areas to describe how organized crime has affected our environment, our communities, and our women and girls. I'd like to thank the speakers for sharing your precious time and knowledge of the issues and solutions at this very important session and point in time when our planet is facing serious threats to its environment caused by humans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suyang, for your remarks. And now I will hand over to Stefano Betti. Stefano Betti is a senior advisor on the Syracuse International Institute on Criminal Justice and Human Rights, and the Deputy Director of the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. He holds a master's degree in European policymaking from the London School of Economics, and an honor diploma in international nuclear law from the University of Montpellier, and a law degree from the University of Milan. Stefano Betti, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Prechtel, for these nice words. And I also really want to thank Optimist International in general for inviting me to speak at this important event. Okay. And I'll go straight into my topic because I see we don't have too much time. So let's try to use it as much as possible. And since we are at a side event to the UN Crime Commission, let me start with the UN, and in particular with the UN General Assembly last year, the last session that took place in October 2023, where President Lula of Brazil noted that deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon had decreased by 48% over the previous 8 months. Okay, now we may spend time discussing the accuracy of this figure. This is not a purpose. Still, this number suggests that efforts to preserve the Amazon basin are gaining momentum again. Okay, and I also wanted to note that just a month before Lula's speech at the General Assembly, Brazil hosted a summit of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which is an organization that gathers all the countries that share this immense rainforest. The event was not the first time the event of this organization was not the first of its kind, and the treaty itself has been signed in 1978, so it's pretty old. However, what's remarkable about the 2023 summit of this organization is that for the first time, the treaty signatories came together explicitly to discuss the protection of the rainforest. And they also adopted a joint plan where they committed to increase cooperation in the law enforcement domain. Now, optimism is good and naivety is bad. And so I would wait a little bit before celebrating and concluding easily that the Amazon has been saved and then that its example is going to be followed by other countries in the world that host similar areas. My point is rather that, and that's why I decided to start with Lula's speech at the General Assembly. My point is that Lula's speech raises some fundamental questions about two major wars that the world is currently fighting. One war is against climate change. Another war is against organized crime. So my question is, are we sure that these two enemies are not joining forces with each other? And if this is the case, can we launch sort of an offensive against one that ends up weakening the other as well? Now, out of the military metaphor, the debate about how to control carbon emissions, as we all know, typically revolves around the pace at which we can realistically switch to renewable energies, the usefulness or not of technologies that are designed to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and so on and so forth. This is all very good. However, there is a significant gap in discussions about the potential contribution of non-traditional tools to the overall effort of addressing climate change. And some of these tools broadly belong to the crime prevention domain and suggest that we ask at least two broad questions. The first question is, how does organized crime contribute to carbon emission? And the second related question is, how can we repurpose our policy and law enforcement tools towards the goal of achieving carbon neutrality? And let me begin with the first question. So how organized crime contributes to carbon emissions? It's not going to be an exhaustive illustration of this. Just wanted to make some key points, of course. And I would say that deforestation stands out as one of the most carbon-intensive activity pursued by organized criminal groups. Primarily, trees are illegally cut down for the purpose of smuggling timber and derived products such as paper and pulp. In Latin America, another frequent objective is to make space for drug cultivation as well. Okay? But also, and interestingly, there is a study from 2017, which has been a seminal study, I would say, that really highlighted how cocaine trafficking contributes to deforestation. How? The study focused on Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, and showed that this illicit activity was found to be responsible for forest losses ranging between 15 and 30%. So what happens in a nutshell is that the proceeds from the drug trade are used to acquire land that is then subsequently cleared and repurposed for agriculture. It is really difficult to think of a more relevant example of links between illegal deforestation, drug trafficking, money laundering, and environmental degradation. And this phenomenon has has grown to such proportion that it has even given rise to a new term. So we are talking about narco-deforestation. Beyond illegal deforestation, waste crime has also emerged as another major culprit in the production of carbon emissions. According to Europol's 2022 threat assessment on environmental crime, the illicit burning of waste is steadily increasing in several UN member states. Illegal waste burning is economically very attractive for a number of players. It offers incredible cost savings to unscrupulous entrepreneurs that seek cheaper and regulated channels to get rid of their industrial waste. It generates substantial profits for full-fledged criminal syndicates that often act as brokers by organizing the transport of the waste from source to destination countries, thanks to networks of corrupt officials and complacent inspection agencies. But also, and perhaps even more alarmingly, there are other players here. And illegal waste burning is a lifeline for impoverished and marginalized communities that struggle to make a living. I don't know how many of the people that are listening to us now saw the mountains of garbage covering the shanty towns of a village near Bucharest. This village really made headlines in 2022 following reports that its inhabitants set fire to whatever they could find around them, from computers to tires to electrical cables, as they were really desperately looking for objects containing a little bit of metal, which they would then try to sell. So what do we do about this? Okay? Well, the most obvious thing to do is clearly for governments to engage in a more focused and vigorous law enforcement action to address organized criminal activities, whenever these are responsible for significant carbon emissions. But, and this is the key point that I wanted to deliver and to convey to you, I think there is much more that can be done than simply arranging a more muscular response. And we can use in a smarter way some of the policy tools that are available to us. And here again, I just want to offer a couple of examples to illustrate the concept. Take criminal asset recovery as a tool. Action aimed at freezing and eventually seizing, and eventually confiscating criminal property can be a very interesting mechanism here. Consider the following. The latest report, again by Europol, but a different kind of report, not the one I mentioned before. Anyways, Europol put the current percentage of criminal assets confiscated by EU member states at a painful 2% of the total amount of proceeds that circulate in the EU, a painful 2%. And yet even a modest 1 or 2-point increase in the percentage of assets recovered from criminal hands would result in gains of several million euros for governments. So my question is, how many new decarbonization projects could be sponsored, green startups funded, energy transition measures subsidized, if we were to improve our confiscation rate by just a few percentage points? Consider the activity that governments handle in terms of managing confiscated criminal assets. Land that is seized from organized crime can be converted into land destined to sustainable carbon-neutral farming practices. Companies confiscated from criminal organizations could be kept alive, potentially, and with the new business model being changed to suit the needs of a circular economy. Okay? Let me, beyond asset recovery, counterfeit goods. In 2022 alone, the World Customs Organization reported a total of 192 tons of medicines, illicit medicines, seized by the customs authorities of its member states. We're not talking only about medicine, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of clothing, toys, handbags, electronics, cosmetics, etc. All of these is stopped at borders every year and declared fake. So what happens is that in many cases, countries simply get rid of them through incineration. And by doing so, they throw tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But, and this is the point, there are other options. And organizations like the World Intellectual Property organizations have already commissioned studies to look into it. There are alternatives to simply burning seized counterfeit goods. Consider recycling. There's a possibility to do humanitarian donations and potentially reintroducing these goods into the market once they've been verified as safe and stripped of their counterfeit markings. Now, I wanted also to give you 3 examples, very concrete ones that are very extractive. As to the recycling, for example, of fake goods, as opposed to simply burn them, there are so many creative solutions. And I just wanted to mention 3 that I came across and I found really interesting. In the Philippines, infringing DVDs have been recycled after granulation. They've been granulated to produce roofing materials, wall and floor tiles. In Europe, the soles of counterfeit sports shoes have been cut into very small pieces and used for the flooring of children's playgrounds. And also very interesting, in South Africa, there is a nice case study where seized counterfeit tobacco has been used as a fertilizer for land rehabilitation. So in a nutshell, by creatively leveraging asset recovery mechanisms and implementing innovative processes for handling counterfeit goods, these 2 examples, we can address 2 challenges simultaneously: combating organized crime and contributing to climate change mitigation efforts. Last point I wanted to make, I'm fully aware of the time that is, the clock is ticking. I'm not suggesting that this task is an easy one, okay? Take the possible use of confiscated assets to support green projects. There are only so far a handful of countries that really know and have the expertise required to manage complex assets such as companies. Most countries are still unfamiliar with what is needed to ensure that confiscated businesses can survive and remain competitive when they are subjected to the higher costs of operating in a legal economy. When it comes to, I mentioned it before, when it comes to humanitarian donations for counterfeit goods that have been seized, here, for example, you have legitimate concerns on the part of brand owners, the companies that legitimately manufacture these products, and who fear a damage to their image and reputation if the goods that imitate their brands are left circulating in the market. And also some of the technologies that are necessary for the environmentally friendly disposal of fake goods can be very expensive. To conclude, it would be a mistake, probably, at least this is my point of view, I stand ready to be, challenged on this. I think it would be a mistake to dismiss these approaches as something that only wealthy countries can afford. This may be true in some cases, but not always. And sometimes I think there is a genuine window of opportunity for sweeping reforms in some countries, that may not be that wealthy. Think about those that are in the process of adapting their legal frameworks and practices to EU standards as a condition for EU membership eventually. So the idea is that whenever possible, the inclusion of a decarbonization component in plans to overhaul the criminal justice and connected sectors should be at least seriously considered. So these are just a few points I wanted to make. I really thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefano, Betty. Thank you for your contribution. And now we'll give the floor to Professor Winivater. Professor Winivater was professor in environmental history in the Alpe Adria University and the University of Natural Resources and Life Science in Vienna. She holds a PhD in environmental history from the University of Vienna. She's a full member of the Austrian Academy of Science, chairperson of the Commission for Interdisciplinary Ecological Studies, and founding member of the European Society of Environmental History. Professor Winivater, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be able to speak to you today. This is a very great opportunity to speak to an audience that I feel is more responsive than many others to this question. And I'm trying to share my screen now with you in order to actually try to speak no longer than 10 minutes, because this is always hard if you do not have your slides available. I want to first alert you to the fact that there was a very interesting UN-sponsored conference not very long ago, Gender Dimension of Crimes That Affect the Environment. All the presentations that were given there are available online, and there is a document in the making. So I would suggest that you watch out for this very interesting and related activity. Environmental crime, as Stefano Betti has already pointed out, comprises waste operations, illegal operations of plants that deal with hazardous material, the killing, destruction, possession, or trade of protected wild animals or plant species, and also the exportation or the product producing of ozone-depleting substances. This is the definition of Europol's impact project, the European Multidisciplinary Platform Against Criminal Threats. What I want to talk about today is that women environmental defenders have mobilized worldwide to fight against crimes against the environment, which are often environmental justice crimes. They have used a very interesting combination of strategies, and they have collaborated with a lot of networks. But women environmental defenders continue to be routinely raped, beaten, shot, strangled, hit by cars, and actually sliced to death to prevent them from exposing and shutting down collaboration between states, corporations, and criminal elements that facilitate ecological degradation. And by now, there is quite some interesting literature here on these facts. Women environmental defenders actually get killed in conjunction with their work. And from this very interesting publication by Dalina Tran on the gender geographies of violence, I just copied the tables, and you can see the 35 certified deaths of women environmental defenders in different locations here. This is not for me to go into details, but I would very much encourage you to check this out. So one of the ways that women are heavily influenced by environmental crimes, and that is very often organized crime, is that they are killed in action. The other way that women are affected by both climate change and other environmental degradations is because of their own susceptibility. And if you recall the heat wave of 2003 in Europe, which was worst in France, the overall excess mortality for women due to this excess heat was 75% higher than that for men. But as women live longer, if you calculate this longevity, because more elderly people are more susceptible to dying from excess heat. So even if you calculate a level playing field for men and women actually still had an excess mortality of 15%. They are just more susceptible to heat danger than men are. That has to do with their physiology. The relatively higher amount of body fat in women as opposed to men also means that they retain toxic chemicals because most of them accumulate in the body's fat tissue in their bodies for longer. So chemical runoff and water pollution from environmental crime activities such as illegal mining, waste dumping, or the use of illegal pesticides affects women to a greater extent than it does affect men. And the same holds true for these periods in a woman's life where rapid physiological change takes place. That is pregnancy, lactation, menopause. That tends to increase their vulnerability to health damage from toxic chemicals. And that is a study that was published by the UNDP 2015 Gender and Chemicals report. If you look at the positive side, Dalina Tran, whom I have also mentioned for the other publication, has tried to put together a whole host of cases how women were successful in combating environmental crimes. And they employed culturally specific strategies and they performed what was available to them as cultural scripts. So how is a woman supposed to behave? To achieve very high, sometimes, but varying levels of success in contexts that are violent, are designed to silence them. One interesting result of this study is that motherhood tropes, while they may inadvertently undermine activism among women environmental defenders who are not conforming to hegemonic femininity, this was still the role that was available as a women environmental cultural specific strategy for women who had nothing else but, say, traditional roles. They also used what is called intersectional narrative. So they identified with ethnic groups. They said, I am a Black woman, or I am a woman of color. I am a poor woman of color, and therefore I have something to say. They also networked with professional associations such as lawyers, as nuns, as interpreters, and many more. They are successful because their strategies, which are sort of intersectionally gendered and all of them have experiences of violence and injustice, counter violent hegemony with inclusive anti-violent ones. All these women try to be non-violent. One of their specific strategies is to employ bodies in protest. So putting out their bodies in order to combat environmental crimes. And that openly defies structures of gatekeeping because it renders them very visible. It evokes emotion, and they can show their scarred bodies as a proof of their environmental damage they have incurred. So I think it's kind of very interesting how we can learn from these women on the front line of environmental defense, which kind of strategies could help. I want to just give you as a final slide, I think 3 or 4 examples of particular women, because I think we should also not forget their names. Ushigwe Santi is a rural indigenous Sapara woman, and she mobilized against fracking in Ecuador's Amazon. She was actually subject to nearly every type of physical aggression that I've named before. Cannon, who is a rural indigenous Inupiat anti-fracking advocate in the Alaskan Arctic, was one of only 2 in this large list of women environmental defenders who did not face any direct violence. But I put her here because she was subject to slow violence. cultural violence, ecological violence, violence not directed against her directly, but against things she valued. Čaputova fought illegal dumps in the Slovak Republic. She, interestingly, we think was not directly threatened because she was a white lawyer. So you can see intersectional problems here again. But interestingly, the Greenham Women's Peace Camp in the UK, that was predominantly middle-class housewives blockading a military nuclear facility. Although they were white middle-class women, they faced heavy violence. And an elderly white middle-class nun from the US who infiltrated and vandalized an army nuclear base also faced a lot of violence, although she had white privilege, relative privilege, I should say, because if you meddle with the military, that is particularly considered dangerous. And think of Karen Silkwood as an example of a woman who was killed for pointing to the problems of nuclear facilities, peaceful nuclear facilities. She's not just a film actor of a very famous film. She was a woman killed as a women environmental defender. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Winiwerter, for your very interesting contribution. And now I will give the floor to Charlene Benjirou. She's a young leader on a mission. She holds a bachelor degree in journalism and media studies. Charlene, please share with us your point of views from the role of civil society in saving the environment. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone from Nairobi, Kenya. As introduced, I'm Charlene, and I'm going to share my perspective on the matter in terms of youth and how the youth are affected by environmental crime and crimes related to the environment. I would like to start this forum or my engagement by acknowledging the ongoing floods that are happening in our country that have put a pause to the education system. As we speak, more than 200 women and girls have been affected by the ongoing floods, and actually that's the number of women and young women and children who have died as a result of the ongoing floods in the country. And when you look at all of this, and given that the schools had been put on hold for 2 weeks, schools and studies could not resume as a result of the extreme harsh climate crisis that we're experiencing in the country, it's a clear indication of how environmental crime affects the youth firsthand. And my colleague has just shared and highlighted the various forms of environmental crime, and I would like to acknowledge that the rising concern about environmental crime among young people, including illegal logging, wildlife trafficking, pollution, and many more. And these crimes have far-reaching consequences, impacting ecosystems, biodiversity, and natural resources. And with all these, our future hangs in the balance. So all through this, we, the young people, are devastated, and we are experiencing an emotional roller coaster, fear, anger, despair, grief, and overwhelmed as we see our habitats being destroyed and species being pushed outside to the brink. Just allow me to, I'm a journalism student, so let me just share a story. There is a place in our country called Maimahiu, and I personally schooled at that place. A school I did there, I went there for my high school, a school called Maimahiu Girls Secondary School. And 2 weeks ago, a certain dam busted due to the ongoing heavy rainfalls, and part of the school was affected by the flood. So it really hit me hard, given that this is a school that has been there for over 40 years, and the ongoing floods, devastating floods, pushed and wiped away a whole environment of students. So it hit hard home because we did lost some of my colleagues who we studied with school at the same time. So seeing that, it makes me feel like maybe I'm the next person. I, as a young person, maybe I'm the next person. I don't know if I'm going to get to 40 without the climate crisis catching up with me. So yeah, so it's the whole causes, the whole impact of environmental crime is just making a lot of us, the young people, to just feel a lot of emotions at the same time. And our perception about the whole matter is we feel betrayed, honestly, by the government because of their inaction regarding this environmental crisis. We feel betrayed, ignored, and abandoned by the policymakers. And it's a high time the government to listen to the science and to take a decisive step to address environmental challenges, because our voices matter and we demand action. And I would like to highlight the challenges and the urgency of the matter. Combating environmental crime is not easy. It's not an easy task because like in our country, logging is illegal, but it still goes on. And also wildlife trafficking is illegal, but it still goes on. And we have very few species of some animals that are left behind. Like, for example, the white rhinoceros. We only have 2 in the country, and there's a time there were so many. Out of a result of wildlife trafficking, we only have 2, and which they are also very old. And at the same time, it's like we are losing hope because their chances of reproducing to have more white rhinos is at the brink. It's like we are giving up. So our cultural heritage is also being destroyed and it's at risk. And we as the youth, we feel like in the next 20 to 30 years, if no action is taken, our whole cultural heritage will be wiped out, and we won't have a place to call home, things to show our identity, things that we resonate with deeply, and we can't afford to delay because the consequences of the inactions are irreversible, and ecosystems being damaged, species lost, and human health being at risk. In conclusion, I would like to urge all member states to take immediate steps to strengthen environmental laws and enforce mechanism and promote collaboration with civil societies, businesses, and academia, and prioritize sustainable practices and conservation efforts. I would like to leave you with a quote by Wangari Maathai that says, "We owe it to ourselves and to the next generation to conserve the environment so that we can bequeath our children a sustainable future that benefits all." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlene, for your contribution. And now I will give the floor to Reverend Liberato Bautista. He is the president of the Conference of NGOs.
Yes, I'm here, Marian.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. And we are looking forward to your closing remarks. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. I'm joining you from New York, and I'm joining you about 12 hours after landing back from Nairobi, Kenya at the United Nations Conference on Civil Society. And that to me is what I would like to open my closing remarks. And congratulations to Soroptimist International and the other co-sponsors of this event, including the Alliance of NGOs and Crime Prevention, SONTA, and others. I know on the screen, I recognize many of my civil society colleagues, especially I think Dr. Martina Gredler, our second Vice President of Congo. And the Conference of NGOs is a proud co-sponsor of this side event. A little over a year ago, I spoke again at the as at a CCPCJ side event, and we talked about the importance of addressing the crime of ecocide, of transnational organized crime, and this side event, first of all, is an example of civil society collaboration in informing policy that affects not only the human body, if I may, but also the body politic, the national discourse in which, and the international setting in which a civil society contribution is no longer just a footnote, but a part of the principal text of norm setting. As president of Congo, I usually speak of the importance of not just access to the premises, to the physical spaces in which civil society contribution is highly regarded, but also to the promises of the UN. So access to the premises and the promises of the UN. It is access to the substantive agenda, such as transnational crime agenda, in which this side event is making a relevant contribution. That's number one. Number two, the fight against organized crime falls into what I call, and my civil society colleagues would have perhaps heard me speak of, the urgent task to heal not just the human body, the biological body, but to heal the body politic. How organized crime has affected not only the human body, but the way we understand policy itself. And I think Professor Betty has spoken to that very clearly. It is not just about the healing of the human body, the healing of the body politic, but the healing of the ecological system itself, and addressing the vulnerabilities and marginalization of women and girls and of the elderly, as we have heard. Lastly, I want to highlight what I heard in many different ways in this gathering, the importance of addressing this issue in relation to the upcoming Summit of the Future. That human security must be coupled with a due understanding of planetary security. We cannot imagine the future that is only for humanity, but not for the entire planet. And therefore, we must imagine a future without climate crisis, without organized crime, and therefore, my challenge to you, and I think I may add a third war, Professor Betty, which is the war on poverty. But I leave you with the question, if the war on poverty is truly a war, we must question why it is not funded just like the many other wars today. And I think that that third war against poverty is crucial to the imagination of a peaceable, just, equitable future that we all want. Again, congratulations to you all for holding this side event.
Thank you very much for your closing remarks. Are there any questions in the chat, Margaret? So if there are none, I would like to thank all the speakers for their informative contribution, and thank you all for attending our meeting today. We would be delighted to see you again at the next side event organized by Soroptimist International, and we hope for your support. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.